Hello, my name is Dillon Fatouros, a political science and history student here at MSU, and this is my policy analysis on Montana House Bill 505. Wildlife management has for a long time been a major issue in Montana politics, particularly regarding Montana's elk populations. While these elk populations are known for their beauty and their wildness and their uniqueness to the state of Montana, they've also caused a significant amount of damage to private landowners and ranchers alike. Particularly, Montana House Bill 505 attempts to address the damages inflicted by elk populations by allowing for more hunting tags to be sponsored by private landowners to help combat against the damages caused by these elk populations on their private land. As well as this, Montana House Bill 505 would like to amend Section 87.2.117 of the Montana Code Annotated, and is essentially a bill adding some revisions to current existing statutes in Montana, as well as also adding new sections regarding to increase tags that could be sponsored by private landowners, and as well as making these tags available for non-state residents alike. I've had the privilege of speaking with Policy Director Hannah Downey at the Property Environment Research Center, also known as PERC, here in Bozeman, and she has filled me in with a lot of the details relating to Montana House Bill 505.
You will see that there are very strong opinions on both sides of this bill. So I would say the proponents, myself included there, were more folks kind of looking out from the landowner perspective there of saying, landowners face this cost from wildlife. How can we help offset that cost or help compensate for that or reduce just the liability that's faced there? And I should clarify too, like, I don't think this is a perfect bill. There's certainly a lot of things that can be done in this space, but the overarching goal I was supportive of, PERC was supportive of, is why we were proponents of the bill. Other folks who supported it include like Montana Outfitters and Guides Association. And they are a group that I think, because they deal so closely with privately leased property for outfitting and guiding, they were kind of viewing this from a similar perspective there, especially because the bill would allow for non-resident to be able to get landowner sponsored license. And so from an outfitter's perspective, there's a real benefit there of if you're outfitting on a property and you can guarantee your non-resident hunters that they can get a tag because the landowner will help sponsor them on that property, like that's a big benefit for them. Landowners viewed it as a potential huge win, a way to capitalize on some of this. FWP actually supported the bill because they saw it as a useful tool to help try and incentivize getting elk populations to that level. Another section of the bill that I haven't really focused on in this conversation as much was looking at the bonus point system. So over time, as a Montana hunter, as you probably know, you can put in and get these points for specialty units, for draw units. So that can increase your odds. And that was one of the elements this bill looked at, is in regions that are over objective. So you have way too many elk causing problems. If people are willing to say, I will hunt an antlerless elk and help drive down the population there, they get extra bonus points. Those numbers through the amendment process have kind of been adjusted. So if you're looking at that, make sure you look at the most recent bill text, but it's kind of a wave. So that's why a lot of folks were involved in a positive. The landowners, FWP viewed it as a management perspective. We viewed it as a way to help incentivize elk tolerance on those private lands in a lot of those migration corridors. Folks who are really strongly opposed include largely the sportsmen's community. There was a great fear that this bill and it's kind of giving landowners the ability to sponsor and guarantee non-resident tags. There was a view that kind of bucked the system and gave landowners higher preference over publicly owned or publicly managed, wildlife. So there's a great concern there over what that might mean for access, what that would mean in terms of potentially extending undue private influence over wildlife management, those sorts of things. There were a lot of sportsmen very, very concerned with it. And I think that's ultimately why the bill got tabled. So it hasn't necessarily been like fully killed, but it's been moved off of the docket for right now. So yeah, you kind of had the classic Montana sportsman versus landowner perspective when it came to elk management.
Interesting.
one of the biggest things or most interesting things to note here is in terms of elk, to my knowledge, and there might be someone who knows elk history far better than I do, who could go way back and tell me, like, no, we did have something like this. To my knowledge, the elk element is unique, or is uniquely new here. I know it's been tossed around. It's been an idea that's been debated. The mule deer we do have, or just deer, I should clarify. Other states, though, a lot of other states, Montana is pretty unique actually in that we don't do landowner sponsored licenses. And we're actually doing, two of my colleagues here at PERC are doing a more thorough analysis comparing state by state what landowner tag options look like. But there's some interesting things to note, like Colorado, there are some options where landowners are able to get tags, or at least like sponsor non-residents, or I think in some cases even residents, but those tags are more closely tied to, you have to prove like habitat conservation, or prove that you're actively trying to manage and improve habitat for ungulates on your property. New Mexico has a similar thing. Idaho, I believe, there's a few options in a lot of these states, but like some states like Idaho, they do a more unique like landowner tag option where they say like, okay, here's the total quota of elk that we want harvested this year. Here's the portion that we want to go to landowners. Landowners are able to put in for those tags. So it's based more on total harvest quota, or like hopeful harvest quota, than Montana was more giving tags out on a basis of just acreage you have. So I think that's really interesting to note, and looking at other states, how they do it. And from a PERC perspective, especially looking at this as, is it a way to actually incentivize wildlife management, or to increase tolerance of elk? I think short term would be really difficult, actually. I think when looking at this bill, you need to look long term, and some of the amendments that have been proposed, maybe even some that have been adopted and whatnot, look at potentially doing time limits on this proposal, seeing things in a way of like, could we maybe do this approach for a while, see what comes of it, and then be able to reassess.
Now, if this policy were to be implemented, it'd be implemented through the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, given that this agency already administers and regulates all of the hunting statutes and tags throughout the state. And beyond that, in a way, it'd be implemented and regulated through the private landowners and ranchers as well, because they'd be the ones sponsoring these hunting tags on their land. Now, this bill is currently tabled, as mentioned earlier in this video, so who knows whether or not this will actually pass and turn into law, but there is still some time in the legislature, so it could cross the finish line. Beyond that, moving to alternative policies, I think the biggest importance beyond an alternative to this policy should be to focus on cooperation between the ranchers and the private landowners and the government agencies. If there's anything I took away and learned from Hannah, was that regardless if this policy passes or another one similar in the future, the main focus should be cooperation. And I think that's essential considering any alternative policies, whether or not they want to cull these elk herds through lethal organized measures, or through hunting means, regardless of how the elk populations are going to be managed, cooperation needs to exist between these private landowners, ranchers, and government agencies such as Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. Elk don't understand that there's a fence here and this person owns this land. The state of Montana is their grazing land. And so understanding that these elk move into private lands and also affect them, they cause damages, so on and so forth. And also these elk populations are an essential part of the state. So I think finding that balance between maintaining healthy elk populations, well as also making sure and understanding and taking care of the damages caused by elk populations on these private lands is important. And so in terms of an alternative policy, I personally think regardless if I give another solution to this or another means, whether it's sterilization efforts through the elk populations, or it's lethal culling, or it's hunting to regulate these populations, I think that cooperation is the biggest takeaway and should be the main focus of any policy now or in the future regarding this issue. Beyond that, I just want to say thank you for watching this video. I hope you learned something, and if not, if you at least enjoyed the video. So thank you again.